Hi, this is Dovid Orlofsky, and welcome to the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. And whether you're watching with our friends over at Torah Anytime, our producers, or wherever you watch and listen to your podcast, as always, we're happy to have you along for the experience. And if on your platform it makes a difference, don't forget to subscribe, to like, to comment, and to do something else. I don't know, whatever else it is you're supposed to do on a podcast. And as you may notice, there's no bookcase with me today because I am filming in front of the beautiful Nov Kinneret Hotel, where we are going to be making the first Orlofsky family Pesach program. So I came up here to do some videos, take some pictures that we're going to use to make a video about people who want to come for Pesach. And in the meantime, we thought since we're up here, we might as well do the podcast from up here so you get a little chance to see what's over here. Right in front of me is the Kinneret. Unfortunately, it's a little hazy today, so you can't really see it too well. Otherwise, I would have put my back to the beautiful Kinneret. But of course, when you come on Pesach, it'll be nice and bright, and you'll be able to see everything beautifully. So that's what we have waiting in store. And like I say, the video will, those who are interested, find out more about Pesach. I will just say, as I said beforehand, the concept is that I would like to invite everyone over my home for Pesach, and I can't. So we're going to invite you all over here, and we're going to spend Pesach together. And that's why it's not the Pesach program in the Nov Kinneret with Rabbi Orlofsky. It's the Orlofsky family Pesach that we're inviting you all to participate in. It should be very special. My attitude is I want to give you a better Pesach than you'll get at home. That's the idea. Okay, so we'll talk more about Pesach, I'm sure. In the meantime, I want to share the sponsorship. The sponsor this week is sponsored by Yehuda Zimmerman in honor of my mother, Feiga Bas Rav Moshe Hacohen, who is niftar on Yud Beis Kislev. And Mitzvah Hashem, the schus of being mefarasem Torah and spreading it throughout Klal Yisrael should be something that should be a schus for your mother and a aliyah for the neshama. And Yehuda is a long-time listener and sends in questions and is very involved. And what can I tell you? Thank you so much for your support. And thank you to everybody who sponsors, because the only way that we are able to do this is because of, the nice people who sponsor and make this podcast possible. Okay. I'll tell you what I wanted to talk about this episode, and I'll tell you what started me off. Every now and then people send me clips basically to get me upset. I understand that, because people get me upset, I get people upset. I remember I would go to visit Rav Moshe Shapiro on Purim. He had his tish going that was open, and I remember one year I was sitting quietly. He says to me, "Reb Dovid, ein l'cha shum kvetch?" So I said, "Well, since you ask," and I went into something that was upsetting me, and he got very upset, and nobody could annoy him like I could. I shouldn't say that. I mean, I'm sure other people could as well, but I was very good at it, So some people like to do that to me too, to get me upset, to get me going. So they sent me a clip. I'll put this clip into context for you so you understand where it's coming from, and hopefully you'll understand what it is that I want to talk about and what I want to bring out over here. Once upon a time, there was a late night host by the name of Johnny Carson. Most of America watched Johnny Carson. I remember reading an article once that said, people do not pay as much attention to the front page of whatever choshev newspaper comes out as they do to Johnny Carson's monologue. He set the tone for America. Yeah. There were other people who tried to compete with him along the way, Joey Bishop, Dick Cavett, different kind of people like this, but nobody could do what Johnny Carson was doing. And after Johnny Carson left, so then you had Jay Leno and David Letterman, a few other people, Craig Ferguson, these kind of people. When they left, you got basically the people who are there today. Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, Stephen Colbert, Seth Meyers. These people are essentially political commentators. They're not comedians. They may have been, they started out as comedians, but now they basically talk politics the whole time. And Ben Shapiro described the audience as clapster. Yeah, it's people just go yeah, yeah, you know what I mean? The jokes aren't really jokes. They're not really particularly funny. It's all just political bashing and essentially just bashing Donald Trump and the Republicans, and that's what they do the whole time. They pretend somehow that this is a comedy show, late night TV, like it used to be. So Johnny Carson would make jokes about Republicans, make jokes about Democrats. People asked, was Johnny Carson a Democrat or a Republican? You never knew. You never knew. Jimmy Kimmel, who's gone over the line a number of times, he was actually canceled by Disney until people threatened Disney, and so they put them back, and they have them back on, but they don't have any ratings. Nobody's really watching them, etc. And it's just depressing. And in fact, not to get too involved in pop culture, but there is a guy who basically does more comedy than them, although it's also basically a political comedy show, Greg Gutfeld, who has higher ratings than any of them. And he's on Fox News, you know, and he doesn't have any big name stars, you know. He has like B-list comedians and a couple of people like that, some people from Fox News who comes on. And he has higher ratings, you know. It just shows you that this is not really capturing the country. Nonetheless, every time they say something outrageous, it gets a lot of press. People want to talk about it. So here's what happened. Yeah. Apparently, Jimmy Kimmel and his wife, who was his producer, was on a talk show. And she said, before the 2024 election, I reached out to my relatives. And I said to them, if you don't give me a commitment that you're not going to vote for Donald Trump, then I want nothing to do with you ever again. I'm breaking off relations with you. And she said, because if you vote for Donald Trump, you're voting against me and my husband. You know what my husband tries to do and how Trump is tax him, and you're voting against my values, etc. And so I want nothing to do with you. This made the news. Made the news. I don't know how many people were supportive of her position, but it certainly became a topic of conversation. Yeah? Should you break off relations with relatives who have different political views than your own? In America, they have a yontif. It's a secular yontif. It's called Thanksgiving. It's the only yontif that's not tied into any religion. It's American. There's a question in halacha whether from Yid is allowed to celebrate it, or if it's called chukas hagoyim or not. You know, I'm not getting into that. But it's definitely an American holiday. It's not a Christian holiday. You could argue the people who started it, the Pilgrims, were Christians and they did it to thank God. You know, that's probably true. But the original Thanksgiving probably came out in September or October. It definitely wasn't at the end of November. It was put there to basically give thanks to all of the blessings that America has, etc. And it's relatively secular. Christmas is also a national holiday, but nobody's going to claim that it's a secular holiday, right? That's obvious. But Thanksgiving is seen as a secular holiday, and that's why Woody Allen, who's a Jew, his real name is Alan Konigsberg, in a lot of his movies, he centers it around Thanksgiving because he has nothing to do with his Judaism. He's not going to take a Jewish holiday. And he's definitely not Christian, so he's not going to take Christmas. So he takes Thanksgiving. In a bunch of movies, it focuses around Thanksgiving. I'm thinking Broadway Danny Rose. I'm thinking Hannah and Her Sisters. I'm sure there are some others like that too, where it focuses on Thanksgiving because Thanksgiving is seen as this secular yontif. And it becomes a big problem. Should I invite over relatives to Thanksgiving, or should I go to Thanksgiving to relatives of mine who voted for Trump? Even if they don't discuss it at the Thanksgiving dinner, but can we have Thanksgiving together if we believe different things? And I thought to myself, it's an amazing concept because there is a concept of family. And we are very careful about family. As Abraham is told, Lech lecha me'artzecha u'meladecha u'mibeis avicha. Leave your country, leave the homeland, and leave your family. Because to leave your family is a very serious thing. Family is very important. You find in the Gemara many times where the family can say something or do something or stop something because there's a bizayon to the family for this. What did we do that we should, all of us, be tarred and feathered with what this particular relative did? That's the concept of family. So I wanted to use this as a jumping off point for a moment to speak about family. Kol mishpacha sa'adama. We talk about the families. Yeah, when we do the census in Pinchas before we go into Eretz Yisrael, we do it by family. The concept of yichus appears many times in the Torah. L'dugma, the first Rashi in the Torah says, why does the Kodesh Baruch Hu start from Bereshis, from the creation of the world? He says, in case people would say to the Jews, Listim atem, you stole this land from the Canaanim. So we'll say to them, Hashem created the world, He took it away from them and gave it to us because it's His world, He can give it to anybody that He wants. Ask the Sifsei Chachamim, why would the nations of the world accept that argument? Why should they accept that argument? We say, God created the world and He gave it to us. So, if you don't accept the Torah, there's nothing to talk about. Obviously that argument is not going to work. But even if you accept the Torah, you could say, okay, He took it away from Canaan and gave it to Shem, who said that he will be an Eved to Shem, and so Canaan had no right to it. But there are other children of Shem besides Abraham. So you have to bring in that HaKadosh Baruch Hu specifically gave it not just to the descendants of Shem, but to Avram himself. And because of what Shem does in the story when they come off of the Teva, that carries through to Abraham. And Abraham can trace himself back to Shem. It was before Pesach, and I was giving a ride to somebody. When I have the opportunity, I try to. Somebody was waiting for a what they call in Israel a tramp. They call in America a hitch. And he waves me down. So of course, if I could do it, I try to do it. And he says to me, "Thank you so much. Let me pay you back with a vort from my father-in-law." So I figure, okay, who's your father-in-law? He says, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. And I said, okay, you got my attention. If he would have said, Beryl Schmerl, I don't know, but that's Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. He says, he asked a question on the Haggadah. It says in the Haggadah, and by the way, if you come from Pesach, full disclosure, you might hear this again. Yeah, if you join my Seder, you don't have to join my Seder. You can make your own Seder, or you can get a private room for a family Seder. But if you join my Seder, I might say this word again. Yeah, it says, "Mitchila of the avodah zara hayu avosenu." Originally, our forefathers were idol worshippers. Says Rabbi Yaakov, that's backwards. It should have said, "Mitchila Avosenu haya of the avodah zara." Originally, our fathers were idol worshippers. What does it mean? Mitchila of the avodah zara haya avosenu. The of the avodah zara were our forefathers originally, and now Hashem has brought us close to Him at Har Sinai, and now they're not. So, what does that mean? So, says Rav Yaakov, because if you want to be perfectly honest, you as a Yid trace yourself back to Yaakov, his father Yitzchak, his father Abraham, his father Terach, his father Nachor, Arpachshad. You go back, and obviously these people were of the avodah zara. But now Hashem has brought us to Har Sinai. So Rabbi Yaakov brings a Gur Aryeh. on the Rashi in Bahaloischa that says the following. V'yivku al mishpachoseihem, the people were crying on their families because they had been married to a rayas and now they had to get divorced. Before the Torah was given, you could marry your sister, a man could marry his aunt, and now that the Torah was given, they had to all get divorced. Moshe's parents had to get divorced because Yocheved was the daughter of Levi, and Kohas was the son of Levi, and his son was Amram. So Amram married his aunt. So Matan Torah, they had to get divorced. So the people were crying, they had to get divorced. Yeah, you were married to your sister, and which is great because you only have to invite one side to the wedding. It's a tremendous advantage. I have a guy who the Gemara describes with Rav's parents that they were step-brother and step-sister. So I have a friend who is like that. His father had him, got divorced, and married his next wife, who had a daughter from their first marriage, and the two of them married each other. And it was really interesting because Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so invite you to the marriage of their children. It's great, you only have one side, and it's a little awkward though, because if you get into a fight, how do you go home to mother? I mean, it's the same parents. But so the Gemara describes that with Rav's parents, Ivo. But okay, they were married, brother and sister. They had to get divorced. Yeah, and so ask the Gur, why they have to get divorced? Because it says that a ger has no relations. Midiaraisa, a ger can marry his sister. They both convert. A brother and sister can get married, Midiaraisa. Because gerim don't have any yichus. They start over again. So if that's the case, why they all became gerim at Har Sinai? Obviously, we were all mekabel the Torah. We learn out how you become a ger from Har Sinai, because they were told first you all have to have a bris milah, and then they were told they all have to go to the mikvah, and then they were told that they had to be mekabel the entire Torah, Nasav and Ishma. And that's the basis we use today when a person is megayah, that you have to do those things. You have to have a bris milah, you have to have mekabel all of the mitzvahs, and you have to go to the mikvah. So they all became gerim, so why did they have to get divorced? So he says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did a special chesed. Why? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave a special bris to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And if we became gerim and we didn't have any yichus, then we wouldn't have any connection to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu reattached the yichus all the way back to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And that's what it means, Mitchila of the Avodah Zarah Haya Avosenu. Originally, of the Avodah Zarah were our forefathers, and now they're not, because our yichus only goes to Avraham and stops there. Terach is not part of our yichus. Neither is our parshad. They were taken out of the picture. So you see that yichus is a very important thing. Throughout the Torah we say, remember, the bris, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. We're descendants of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. We ask for that. Everyone knows the famous story with the Chavetz Chaim, where Shimon Schwab came to the Chavetz Chaim before he was going to take a Stella in Germany to get a bracha. And Chavetz Chaim looks at him and says, are you a Kohen? And he says, no. He says, are you a Levi? He says, no. He says, how come? He says, because my father wasn't a Kohen or a Levi. Oh. How come he wasn't a Levi? He says, because his father wasn't a Levi. Ah. So how come his father wasn't a Kohen or a Levi? So he's starting to think, Chavetz Chaim is pretty old. He's starting to lose it. He goes, his father wasn't a Kohen or a Levi. And the Chavetz Chaim looked at him and said, you know why I'm a Kohen and your father wasn't? Because when Moshe Rabbeinu said, Mila Hashem Elai, whoever is for God, come to me. My Alta Zayda came and yours didn't. That's why people are Kohanim and Leviim today, because when that moment of truth came, they answered the call. Now you're going to Germany, and Hashem is going to call upon you again. Mila Hashem Elai. Don't miss the call a second time. But I'm a Kohen because my great-great-great-great-grandfather Aaron made a choice. And other people are Leviim because their great-great-great-great-grandparents made a choice. And people make decisions and it affects them. Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron a Kohen. We don't usually go back 3 doros. Why did we go back 3 doros? Says Rashi, because they were making fun of Pinchas and said, how could you do something so cruel as to kill a Nasi for Yisrael? It must be because your Zayda was Yisro, who was an Oved Avodah Zorah. And that's how you could do this act of cruelty. So Rashi was misyaches him back to Aaron to say, just as Aaron was an Ohev Shalom and a Rodev Shalom, so was Pinchas. Eslach Sam Sefer. Shkoyach. It's just, you're just playing a game here. Whether I misyaches you to this grandfather or that grandfather, the taina remains the same, that your grandfather was an Oved Avodah Zarah. It says a Ksav Sefer. You're right. You're right. But it means that the power of the yichus of Aaron was so strong it canceled out whatever he got from Yisro. But they were right. There's got to be something there in your past that allowed you to do this. Where did this come from? There was a fellow who wanted to get into the Tuesday Shir of Rav Moshe Shapiro. I used to go to the Tuesday Shir. So the Thursday Shir was open to everybody, and the Tuesday Shir was not. And he wanted to go to the Tuesday Shir, and he says, look, Bachrim don't come, only, married people. So he says to Rav Moshe Shapiro, he says, but I have a special schooler to become a Talmid Chacham. So Moshe says, yeah, let's hear. He says, it says one of the 3 inherent traits of Jews to know whether somebody is descended from Abraham, Yitzchak, or Yaakov, or if they came from the Erev Rav, they converted in, is that they're Baishanim, Rachmanim, and Gomli Chasadim. They're embarrassed, what's called Jewish guilt, what's called shame, and they're Rachmanim. It's hard for them to be really cruel. If you look at the way that America fought the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, they did not show the restraint that the IDF showed in Gaza. Not that it helps, because people will call us baby killers anyway, genocidal maniacs. Doesn't matter what we do. We should have just done whatever has to be done because nobody cares about us. But we're Jews, we're Rachmanim, it's hard for us. And Gomle Chasadim, we do a lot of chesed and tzedakah and charity, right? He says, so one of the attributes of a Jew is Baishanim, that they have a natural sense of shame. But it says in Pirkei Avos, Ena Baishan Lomet. Someone who's embarrassed can't learn. So that means that every Jew who was born Jewish is at a disadvantage because he's naturally a Baishan. And so he said to Rav Moshe Shapiro, he said, but my father wasn't Jewish when I was born. He converted later. So I don't come from Jewish stock. So I'm not such a Baishan. I'm not so embarrassed. So it'll be easier for me to learn. That's what he said to Rav Moshe. So Rav Moshe says to him in English, you're okay, kid. And he let him come to the shir. But it's true. Rabbi Zakatinsky works with kids who are on the street. And he says it's easier to bring back a boy than a girl, because for a girl to make it on the street, she only has to do one thing, and a Jewish girl can do that as well as a non-Jewish girl. But to make it on the street when you're a boy, you have to be able to take a razor and slice up somebody's face. A black kid can do it, a Hispanic kid can do it, an Italian kid can do it. It's hard for a Jew. It doesn't come naturally to them. Or as Jackie Mason said, a Jew can't be a mugger. He can't pull out a gun and say, give me all your money. He says, how much you got? Let's work out something. But it's an interesting idea. You know, Jews have certain natural traits that are built into us, what we call genetic characteristics. And I know we don't like to talk about that, nurture versus nature, but we say, yeah, every Am has a certain national identity. Are there exceptions? Of course. But we're talking about as a people, there's a certain natural identity that's associated with these people. You know, there are certain things that the Japanese don't get. I'll give you an example. Steve Allen, who was originally the host of The Tonight Show before Johnny Carson. So he said, he once told a joke to a Russian, a high-ranking Russian. He says, the difference between capitalism and communism is that in capitalism, man oppresses man, and in communism, it's the opposite way around. So he laughed. He says, I said this to a communist Chinese, and he goes, I don't understand, it's the same thing. So they're different people who have different senses. They did a poll around the entire world. They said, excuse me, sir, what is your opinion of the meat shortage? So they asked this question in America, and the answer they got was, what's a shortage? And they asked this question in Poland, and they said, what is meat? And they asked this question in Russia, and they said, what is an opinion? And they asked this question in Israel, and they said, what is excuse me? There's certain, again, there are generalizations, but there are certain things that certain peoples have as part of their national identity. And of course, you could become assimilated, you could lose those things, but they're part of your genetic makeup. So family is something that's extremely important, and the Torah puts tremendous emphasis on it. Yeah? When it comes to giving tzedakah, the Rambam says, the first priority is your family. And everyone knows that there's a mitzvah of Ma'aseh Ksafim, giving 10% of your money to tzedakah. And the Rambam says, the first priority is your family. And that's why I meet people sometimes, and they say to me, I'd like to be able to support tzedakahs, but I tell you the truth, I've got a bunch of kids in learning, and I need to support them. I'm not mechuyev to support them. I look at it as tzedakah. Family comes first. I know somebody else who used to sponsor something in the show, and he says, look, I can't. I have relatives who are going through a hard time. I got to give them the money instead. That's what the Rambam says. Family comes first. So could you imagine you break off with your family over politics? Or over some other shtuyot? I may have told this story. I was contacted by a woman in Brooklyn, asked me to sign off on their organization. It's an organization for parents whose children stop talking to their parents. And I said, well, are there a lot of people involved? This was years ago. They said, hundreds of families where kids just, and sometimes they'll go to some rabbi and they'll say, well, that's Torah. I remember where somebody did this once, and big Talmid Chacham said to me, what do you think he is, a child? He knows you're not allowed to paskin a din without talking to both parties. He didn't speak to the parents to hear their side, because very often, I remember in NCSY, I had a kid, who was doing certain things that I was going to have to send him home. And he begged me, please don't do it, because my mother's, remarried and my stepfather will beat me. I was like, oh my gosh, well then I definitely don't want to see the kid get beaten. I'm not ad kedei kach, So I let him get away with a lot of stuff. And at one point, his mother called me up after about a couple of months of this and said, how come my son is allowed to do X, Y, and Z? So I fumfed and I said, well, she says, did he tell you that my husband beats him? And I didn't say anything, because he says this to everybody to get out of stuff. He says it in school. He says this one. He says, my husband has never laid a hand on him ever. It's all nonsense. He just makes it up. So today, the term abusive is used. Everybody who has a problem is abusive. There's no question that today my father would be considered abusive. Back in that generation, he wasn't. I used to say, and kids today are of course horrified, my father had only one educational tool. He would take off his belt and beat you. And people are of course horrified, but people in my age group are like, yeah, my dad too. Unfortunately, that was when you took a chinuch class back then. He would say expressions like, I'll wrap you in the mouth, you know what I mean? Or my mother would say, I'll throw you down the stairs. Or other colorful expressions that no doubt they picked up from their parents, And today, if you don't let a kid do something, you read these news stories more often than you can imagine. Parents wouldn't let the kid use the computer, whatever it is, and they stabbed him or shot him or some craziness like this, because we've raised a generation of people who are entitled and they can do whatever they want, say whatever they want, But to break off relations, it's a very serious thing. And so you have to be very careful before you do something like that, because family is very important. And we go to great lengths to maintain relationships with family, no matter what it takes. Now, are there red lines? Of course there are red lines, right? In my generation, if somebody intermarried, you would sit down and sit shiva for them. I saw a film from the 1960s put out by the Reform movement of a film where you see this man tear kriya, light a yortzeit candle, sit down on the floor and start crying, and then it cuts to his daughter getting married in the church. That was the Reform movement. Okay, today it's not the same thing. It doesn't mean the same thing, because people have been assimilated for so long that it's not a rebellion. It's not somebody who grew up in a frum home and then is turning their back on what's important. I remember there's a book that came out called How to Stop an Intermarriage. And in it they had this one scene where this rabbi would bring in the boy who was thinking of getting intermarried. And he'd bring him into the synagogue, and he'd open the ark, and he would tell him to take out the Sefer Torah. And he was holding the Sefer Torah. And the rabbi said, now throw it on the floor. The kid says, what? Throw it on the floor and stamp on it. And he says, God forbid. He takes the Torah away from him, puts it back in the ark and says, but that's what you're doing. Today, I'd be terrified to do that. Take the Torah, throw it on the floor and stamp on it. Sure, because what does the Sefer Torah mean to anybody today? Nothing has any meaning. Everything is so so far, people don't even think about it. And people don't understand this. There was a time when, a person would get intermarried, took it for granted that their family wasn't going to come. A church to see them get married. Today, people are always shocked. They have someone who's a Baal Tshuva. Because the parents go. And the kid doesn't go. And the person's like, I came to your wedding. They don't understand the difference. I had to dress sneeze to come to your wedding. Had to wear a long skirt and put on a shawl. So I sacrificed, why can't you sacrifice? They don't even understand. So we work with them. We understand that we may have to do more in order to be able to get a sensitivity to what it means to be a Jew. So, you have relatives who make fun, relatives who don't keep Shabbos, all kinds of things. So, okay, so you have to make a little bit more of an effort. I've told this story before, but I had relatives who were making a chasana, and I was questionable about the kashrus. It certainly wasn't mahadrin. So I called up the mashgiach and I said, Yehudi shirak ochel mahadrin, mahu yochol le'echol po. A person who only eats mahadrin, what can he eat here? So the mashgiach himself, I checked into him, he was considered a reliable guy. He says, well, the bread is badats, and the dips are badats. We buy the dips. So they're fine. The vegetables are gush katif, and I wash them and check everything myself. So he says, so you can definitely have the bread and the salads and the dips. And I said, the soup? No. The fish? No. I didn't even ask about the main course. It's okay. So I went in and I washed because I knew my relatives were going to watch to see if I was eating at their simcha. And I washed, and I had bread, and I had the salads, and I had the dips. That's a fine meal. When I came here in 1975 to learn in yeshiva to Eretz Yisrael, one of my great treats was I'd go out to the falafel store and I would order a hummus plate, which was an actual plate, glass plate, and they put their homemade hummus and they swirled it around, put a couple of falafel balls on it, a little olive oil, gave you a nice, fresh, warm pita. What a great meal. So here I am having dips and bread and salads. It's mamish unbelievable. It's a wonderful Suda. But I checked into it and I did what I had to do. My mother grew up with no background. Her father did not go to Shul on Yom Kippur, she said. Her mother's father was a big Rav in Vilna, but, back then when you came to America as a kid, to avoid the pogroms, you married whoever you could marry. So apparently nothing. He didn't keep anything. So my father grew up in a Shomer Shabbos house. So when my father became frum, my mother went along with it. And then when my father died, my mother was left over as a frum almana, but she didn't know anything. She never grew up with these things. She only did whatever my father did. So my parents had moved to West Hampstead where three of my brothers were living. And my brothers and their children would all come over and visit after davening. And my mother would put out food. And one of the things she would do is put out cocktail franks. Cocktail franks are, for my non-Jewish listeners, because I get letters from them from time to time, think of pigs in blankets, only instead of pig, it's sausage, it's beef, okay? It's like a little frankfurter, it's wrapped in dough, and it's baked. Is it the bane of my existence? Yes. Luckily I live in Eretz Yisrael where I can't get them. The only reason I've lived this long is because I live in Eretz Yisrael and I cannot get cocktail franks, and Lowen's Bakery went out of business and stopped making cream puffs. Otherwise, I would have been dead 20 years ago. Because those things are terrible, and I don't know how to say no. The first time I had Lowen's cream puffs was in 8th grade. It was a Shabbaton in the Youngersville of Woodmere. And we were placed at somebody's house. And before Shabbos, she puts out a box of Lowen's cream puffs and some drinks and says, here, before Shabbos have something. And I was there with another guy, and I ate one, he ate one, and we looked at each other and we went, oh my gosh, we just polished off the whole box, which was not cool. And I don't remember who I stayed by, but if you're still alive and you're watching this, or your children, I apologize. I add that to the sins of my youth. Yeah. But to be honest, I was onus. I cannot be held responsible when there are low in cream puffs. In any event, so when I would come, my mother would dafka make cocktail franks. Yeah. But she would put them in the oven on Shabbos morning. So I went to Rabbi Yehuda Kelemer, one of the finest Talmidei Chachamim of the past generation. Really outstanding individual. I don't know if I've ever spoken about Rabbi Kelemer. There's somebody I know who knows a lot and doesn't have a lot of respect for most rabbis because they're a lot of show and very little substance. But he used to speak in awe of Rabbi Kelemer. You know, he says, I was once doing a sugya in Tzabra L'chaim, and I went over to ask him a question. So he goes, yeah, so-and-so, yeah, what's your question? He says, who's holding in Hilchas Tzabra L'chaim, which is causing pain to animals? That's it. Rabbi Kelemer was. He says, one time I asked him a question, and he sent me to some journal. And I read the article, not talking about what I asked at all. And I come back to him, and he looks at me and says, you didn't look at the footnotes? Footnote 17. But that he knew what it said in footnote 17 in some article in some journal. You know, it was amazing what he knew and how much he was holding. So I said to him, listen, my mother Shabbos morning takes the cocktail franks out of the freezer and puts it in the oven. And he looks at me and he goes, and she knows you love cocktail franks, and she's going to be watching to see whether or not you eat them, and if you don't eat them, she's going to be upset. I said, you got it. He says, cocktail franks are already cooked. You're not cooking them. They're just being heated up. So just wait till they're not yad lettuce bow and you can eat them. But he didn't say, what? Cooking on Shabbos? Feh. Don't do anything there. No. You see how you can work it out. Yehuda Albin runs an organization in Chicago called Torah Hub. Works with different balabatim. And he says, I had this one balabas, I kept trying to get him to come over to my house for Shabbos. I wouldn't go. So finally I told him, yeah, I'm coming over your house for Shabbos. And my wife cooked all the food, and we brought our own hot plate, and set everything up. And they joined us for the Suda, and we sang Zmiros, so some different Torah, and then they went to watch TV, or to go to the mall, or do whatever they did. But we kept Shabbos in their house, or at least they could see how to keep Shabbos. This is sort of the concept of the traveling Hasidim, if you've ever met them. They're a group of Hasidim in Muncie. And they traveled around to different communities where they make a Hasidic Shabbos for the people. I want you to see what it is. They eat their meals in shul, and everybody's invited, and, and they just, if anybody wants to see what a Hasidic Shabbos looks like, to get a tam, this is what it looks like. This is how it goes. It's a beautiful idea. But the easy thing to do is just to say, I'm not having anything to do with you. Person says to me, I don't think I'm a chuyev in kibbut avim because I think my father has a din of a rosha. I said, Taka? He says, yeah, it's not Shomer Shabbos. I said, didn't you go to yeshiva day school? He says, yeah. He says, your father paid tuition to send you to a yeshiva day school, and you think he's a Russia? This is the only reason you're from today is because of your father, and you decided he's a Russia because he doesn't keep Shabbos? It's very easy to write people off. Years ago, when my father still was not Shomer Shabbos, he became Shomer Shabbos when he was 67, people would say to me, "Are your parents religious?" And I would say, "I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to say." You know? When I was younger, I asked my father once, I said, "Are we Reform, Conservative, Orthodox?" So he knew we weren't Orthodox because he worked on Shabbos, but he figures we go to a conservative, and I go, "Well, we're conservative." He says, "We're conservative." So I said, "Dad, you know, conservative also says you have to keep Shabbos." He says, "Okay, we're Reform." My father was no way Reform. When I told him once that the conservative movement took out of their siddur the concept of Tchias HaMesim because they don't believe in Tchias HaMesim and Olam Haba, he got very upset. What do you mean they don't believe in that? Of course you believe in it. The problem is people give themselves labels, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, based on observance. So if you keep 30% you're Reform, 60% you're Conservative, 90% you're Orthodox, 100% you're Hasidic. That's how you can have a term like conservadox, 75%. Reformative, 43%. But it's not the philosophy. Most Reform Jews don't know what Reform believes in. And most conservative Jews certainly don't know what conservative believes in. One might argue most Orthodox Jews don't know what Orthodoxy believes in either. But there's more of a chance that they do. Yeah? But people define themselves by their level of observance. So at some point when people asked me, "What's your father?" You know, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, I said, he is a non-practicing Orthodox Jew. Because hashkafically he was completely Orthodox. I'll never forget on a Yom Kippur, where he was complaining to the rabbi, because my father always went to Shul Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. He didn't go Shabbos. He was in the flower business. He felt that it was the busiest day of the week. He couldn't take off. You know, he would go occasionally on Yontif, but Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur he always went. So one Yom Kippur he says to the rabbi, he says, "I really should be keeping Shabbos. It's not right. I need to, you know, whatever it is." He was giving his, you know, how he really should. And the rabbi, who was an Orthodox rabbi in a conservative synagogue, he says, look, Marty, you got 6 kids, you have a big family, you support them, you give a lot of charity. You know, the fact that you work Shabbos is not such a big deal. And my father got angry at him. And he said, "You're the rabbi. You're supposed to be telling me I'm doing the wrong thing. I know I'm doing the wrong thing. Don't tell me I'm doing the right thing." So hashkafically, he knew that what he was doing was wrong. And people write off their parents. And people write off their brothers and sisters. And people write off their children, their cousins. This girl told me that she met this Rebbitzin. And the Rebbitzin said, "What's your name? Where are you from? Are you related to this one? Are you related to that one?" So she didn't know what she's asking him. We have nothing, no connection. And the Rebbitzin said, "We're all related. We just don't take enough time to ask enough questions. Otherwise we'd see we're all related." A very good point. We're all related. And you're going to start writing people off because they didn't vote the way you wanted. They don't believe in the same things you believe in. I was speaking for Jeff Seidel on Hebrew University. And I was speaking before Rosh Hashanah, and I was talking about using the opportunity to look at your life, etc., etc. There were these 2 Reform students, a guy and a girl, and they tag teamed me. And I should have seen it coming, but the audience was so receptive that I didn't see it coming. It's my fault. I blame myself. So one of them said, "Well, isn't it important to have a good relationship with your fellow man?" isn't that what Rosh Hashanah is about? And I said, no, not really. Rosh Hashanah is about your relationship between you and God. Yom Kippur is between you and your fellow man. Rosh Hashanah is just about between you and God. So he says to me, but your relationship with your fellow man is also important. I said, yes, but that's not what Rosh Hashanah is about. It might be what other, Yom Kippur is about, but it's not Rosh Hashanah. And he kept pressing me, and so I wanted to be accommodating, and I said, yeah, okay, relationships between people is also important. And then he looked to his friend, the girl there, and of course I fell for it. And she says, well, then how am I supposed to go into Rosh Hashanah when I see these Haredim who are throwing rocks at people at the kotel? And I fell for it. It's my own fault. I have no good excuse. I fell for it. I should have seen it coming. But I was fooled. They tricked me. Yeah. So there's an old expression, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I used to teach a course on how to answer basic questions. And someone asked me, how did you learn how to give so many good answers? I said, by giving bad ones. And then whenever that happens, I go back and look at it and say, what would I say the next time I find myself in that situation? So I replayed it in my head. I put myself back in that situation. The person says to me, how can I go into a show when I see these Orthodox Jews throwing rocks at people? And I said, what a great point. Let me explain to you about Rosh Hashanah. You hear a day of judgment and you think that means I should judge people. Let me judge the Orthodox people. Let me judge the Reform people. Let me judge my parents. Let me judge my siblings. Let me judge my friends. Because I think I'm God and I hear day of judgment, let me go out there and judge everybody. No. God is the one who's judging. You're the one who's being judged. I would spend a lot more time looking at yourself than looking at other people. And if you walk into Rosh Hashanah and you say, how can I go into Rosh Hashanah when there are so many people not living up to my standard and I'm upset with them, then you don't know what Rosh Hashanah is about at all. It's all about you. You have to look at yourself and how God is going to look at you and stop looking at other people. That would have been a great answer. I wish I had given it. Instead, I lost complete control of the room. And, well, you learn lessons that way. Anyway, I just wanted to share this idea with you because I was so frustrated when I see people willing to break off with their family and to discount people. What a terrible thing. A terrible thing. And at least in our own lives, we should make as much of an effort as we can to try to keep family in our lives instead of letting them drift away over issues like politics. Obviously, having said that, I always have to add on a caveat. Somebody wrote me on the previous podcast where I talked about having children, and a woman said, I was very hurt by your podcast because I can't have children, and you spent the whole podcast speaking about the importance of having children, and I couldn't have children, and I was very hurt. Yes, at the end you discussed the purpose of marriage if you don't have children, but I was still hurt. So I said, the person wrote me a question asking, why should I have children? How can I answer them in a way that you won't be hurt? They're asking me, should they have children? So should I say, no, because I know this lady who can't have children. I can't do that. And she said to me, you're right, but I was hurt. So let me just add in the end, are there exceptions? Of course there are exceptions. If there's somebody in your life who's dangerous, who's going to abuse your children, who's, whatever the case may be, then yeah, you have to distance yourself from those people. But err on the side of caution, unless, again, there's a safety issue, not just, they give me the heebie-jeebies. I have a lot of people in my family who give me the heebie-jeebies. I'm sure I give some people the heebie-jeebies. But I don't think that's enough of an answer. Okay, and of course, producer Ari always sends me some some nice things that people say about me to make up for the fact that I give people the heebie-jeebies. I love the Rabbi Orlofsky show for the simple reason that while in the kitchen where I listen to all my Torah shiurim and podcasts, I hope you cook a lot, I find myself always smiling and having a chuckle at his random comments and jokes. Yeah, if you ever go and watch the highlight reels, I don't remember saying any of those things. And I laugh out loud because they're funny. And there is nothing better for a marriage than a husband coming home and seeing a happy wife smiling and happy and full of things to say and some funny scenarios to share with him. That's the old expression, happy wife, happy life. He said we should share our favorite jokes. Well, the one I always remember is the one about Rosh Hashanah. It's always late or early, but never on time. I find myself always quoting that when Rosh Hashanah comes around, in the Rav's name, of course. Thank you for all the subjects you cover, and never disappointing. It's the way you tell over your material with wit, humor, seriousness, deepness, sensitivity, truth, and honesty. Gosh, I wish my mom was still alive. You can't beat that. All the ingredients for a great and meaningful show. Thank you, Rabbi Orlofsky. A few weeks ago, at Thursday Night Hashkafa, the topic being discussed was Jewish video entertainment. At some point, someone started mentioning entertainment videos with Torah messages and was referring to Rabbi Siddur and the like. The second he mentioned your name, the Rosh Hashiva, Rabbi Dovid Harris, started laughing, saying, "Oh, he's so funny. He's almost as good as Rosh Shalom Shadran. I thought you'd appreciate that." Yes, I do. First of all, Rabbi Dovid Harris, before he was Rosh Hashiva, the whole yeshiva was my Rosh Hashiva in Rochester, and he used to get a kick out of me. And when I was learning in Rochester, it was not at one of my best periods. Rabbi Harris and Rabbi Davidowitz were the Rosh Yeshiva. And at one of these rap sessions, one of the guys told me, he says, he asked Rabbi Davidowitz, who's the best guy in the yeshiva? And he says, David Orlofsky. He says, what? He's not into stuff. He says, no. But whenever you explain something to him, he chops it right away. And you ever listen to his jokes? You know how fast his mind has to work to come up with those jokes? So to be compared to Rosh Shadran by my former Rosh Hashiva, that is, of course, a tremendous cover. Thank you so much. And that's it for this week. Coming to you from the beautiful Nof Kinneret Hotel, where we will be here for Pesach. There's only 150 rooms. And I got to tell you, I got people taking 6, 8, 10 rooms. So if you're planning on joining, please take a look at the link, Castle's travel agency, and call them up. You can't sign up online over here. They say, no one wants to pay that much money. They want to talk to somebody. So call up Castle, speak to Tzipi, tell them I saw Rabbi Orlofsky and I want to be part of his family Pesach program. And after you sign up, then we're going to send you a whole questionnaire if you want to be part of my Seder, if you want to have your own Seder, if you want to get a private Seder, if you're a Kohen, a Levi, Yisrael, or a Yichus to be decided. We'll have a lot of questions for you, But for now, if you're interested in coming, we'd love to have you. And that's it for now. Until next time, I am David Orlofsky, and this has been the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.
It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Knowledge and wisdom will help you grow. Lots of fun in every episode. And we don't have to rhyme. No, we don't. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show on RabbiOrlofsky.com. Torah anytime, YouTube and more. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Till next time, till we meet again. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.